deep in the heart of whispering woods, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the forest fell silent. The birds had tucked themselves into their cozy nests. The deer were grazing peacefully, and the playful squirrels had scampered up their trees ready for bed. Up in the canopy, nestled in her hollowed-out tree home, was an old wise owl. Her name was Ollie, and she was fast asleep until suddenly, just as the last rays of sunlight faded away, she heard a tiny rustle outside her tree home. Ollie slowly opened one eye, then the other, and hooted softly. "Who's there?" she called out. A small voice squeaked, "It's just me, Ollie," and out popped a little brown squirrel with a bushy tail. "I couldn't sleep," he said sheepishly, "and I thought maybe you could tell me a story." Ollie chuckled, a deep throaty sound that rumbled in her chest. "Well, if you can't sleep, why don't you come inside and I'll tell you a story?" And so the little squirrel, whose name was Nibs, snuggled up beside Ollie while she told him fantastical tales of brave woodpeckers and mischievous foxes, until he felt his eyelids growing droopy, and it was easy for him to drift off to sleep. As the first rays of sunlight peeked over the trees, signaling the start of a new day, Nibs stirred from his slumber. He yawned widely and stretched. "Oh, thank you, Ollie," he said. "That was the best story ever. I feel so much better now. I can go back to my dray and get some sleep." With a final wave to Ollie, Nibs scampered down the tree and away to his home. Once the forest awoke and the sun climbed higher in the sky, Ollie would often see Nibs scampering around the branches, and sometimes, when the two of them would meet, Nibs would ask Ollie more stories. But as the days went on, the stories weren't enough for Nibs. He wanted to learn more, but when the sun went down and the moon took its place in the velvet sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Ollie would close her eyes and go to sleep, which left poor Nibs without any answers. Then one night, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, Nibs couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. So instead of going to his dray, he did something very naughty. He crept up to Ollie's tree and peeked inside. To his surprise, Ollie wasn't fast asleep like she usually was. Instead, she was surrounded by all the forest animals, and they were gathered around something magical. In front of Ollie, floating above the heads of the sleeping animals, were hundreds of tiny golden stars. They twinkled and shimmered, creating a breathtaking sight. As Nibs watched in awe, Ollie turned to the sleeping animals and said in a voice that was like the rustling of leaves, "Welcome to the midnight school. While the rest of the world sleeps, we come together under the light of the moon to learn and explore." She looked at the sleeping faces of her students, each one dreaming of adventures yet to come. There was Ferdinand the fox, curled up in a ball, his bushy tail wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Penelope the porcupine, her quills forming a protective circle around her. Roger the rabbit, his nose twitching softly as if he were already hopping through moonlit meadows. And Theodore the deer, his head resting on his paws, his large ears perked up, ready to catch every word. Nibs, hiding behind a leaf, felt a pang of sadness. He wished he could join them, but he was just a little squirrel. What could he possibly have in common with a wise old owl or a clever fox? Just as Nibs was about to turn and run away, feeling disheartened, Ollie stopped her lesson and suddenly turned her glowing eyes toward the opening of her tree home. "Who's there?" she hooted. Startled, Nibs fell from his hiding spot and tumbled down onto the soft moss below. All eyes turned to him, blinking in the darkness. I'm sorry," stammered Nibs. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just couldn't help but listen. It looks so fun in here." A hush fell over the clearing. Ollie stared intently at Nibs, her eyes shining with wisdom. Then after what seemed like an eternity, she finally spoke. Well, Nibs, since you've shown such an interest in our studies, I believe you have the right to be here. Relief washed over Nibs, and he scurried up the tree and settled down between Theodore and Ferdinand. Ollie smiled warmly at him. Now let's continue our lesson. And so Nibs spent the rest of the night listening intently, as Ollie shared her knowledge of the stars, the moon, and the mysteries of the universe. Time flew by, and before he knew it, the first faint streaks of light began to appear in the eastern sky, signaling the end of another magical night at the midnight school. When the forest awoke, Nibs found himself filled with a newfound wonder and excitement for life. He bid farewell to his new friends, promising to return as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. And true to his word, every night Nibs would scamper up to Ollie's tree and join the midnight school. He listened attentively as Ollie taught them about dreams, the importance of kindness, curiosity, and the endless wonders that surrounded them. Each night brought new lessons and new discoveries. One evening, Ollie turned to her students, her eyes twinkling. Tonight, we're going to learn about the different types of trees in our forest. She spread her wings, taking flight, and soaring high above the clearing. Look below you, she instructed. Can you tell me what type of tree this is? The students craned their necks, straining to see. That's an oak tree, called out Ferdinand, his voice echoing in the stillness. And this one with the smooth grey bark is a birch tree, added Penelope. How about this tall tree with the needles and cones? Asked Ollie. That's a pine tree, replied Roger confidently. Nibs, however, was struggling. He looked out over the forest, but all the trees seemed the same to him. Frustrated, he whispered, I can't tell the difference between them. Hearing his disheartened voice, Ollie swooped down beside him, her gaze full of understanding. Don't worry, Nibs, she said gently. It takes time and patience to learn. Just keep observing and asking questions, and you'll see the differences. Encouraged by Ollie's words, Nibs continued to study the trees. Night after night, he observed their shapes, their bark, their leaves, and he listened to the songs of the birds that nested in their branches. Slowly but surely, he began to notice the subtle yet beautiful distinctions between each tree. A few weeks later, Ollie once again took flight, circling above the forest. Can someone tell me what tree this is? She asked. The students looked out over the landscape, their minds racing. It's a maple tree, called out Nibs confidently. The others nodded in agreement. That's right, Nibs, said Ollie, beaming with pride. You've learned so much, haven't you? Overjoyed by his progress, Nibs couldn't help but smile. He realized that with dedication and curiosity, anything was possible. The nights flew by like the swift wings of an eagle, and soon summer's warmth gave way to the crisp air of autumn. During their nightly lessons, Ollie taught the students about the changing seasons, the cycle of life, and the importance of embracing each moment. One particularly chilly night, as the wind rustled the falling leaves, Nibs found himself snuggled up to Theodore for warmth. Suddenly, a loud clap of thunder boomed overhead, startling the young squirrel. What was that? He whispered, trembling slightly. Seeing Nibs's fear, Ollie approached him, her voice soft and soothing. That, my dear Nibs, was a clap of thunder. It's the sound the clouds make when they're rumbling and grumbling, she explained. Sometimes they rumble because they want to shake the trees and make the leaves dance. Or sometimes they rumble because they're sad and lonely and want to make friends with the rain. As Ollie spoke, the thunder rumbled again, but this time it didn't sound scary to Nibs. It sounded like a friendly giant snoring softly in the distance. Relieved and comforted by Ollie's words, Nibs felt his fear melt away, replaced by a sense of wonder. He learned that even the scariest things could be beautiful if you just understood them a little better. As the night wore on, the rain began to fall, drumming a gentle rhythm on the leaves above them. The animals in the clearing snuggled closer to one another, sharing stories and jokes to keep their spirits high. When the first rays of sunlight peeked through the clouds, signaling the end of the night, Nibs felt a sense of peace and belonging he had never experienced before. He was no longer just a little squirrel afraid of the dark. He was Nibs, the brave, the curious, the one who understood the language of the trees and the song of the thunder. He had come so far, and he knew that with the support of his friends and the guidance of his wise teacher, Ollie, he could continue to grow, learn and explore the endless wonders of the world around him.